Some dare call it conspiracy.
Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies.
Hey initiates! Today, we continue our deep dive tour of one rabbit hole known as the Paul is dead theory. Did Paul McCartney die in a car crash in 1966? And was he replaced by session musician and producer William Shepard, as some have alleged? Let's see.
On with the book. So Billy claims that the drumhead on the Magical Mystery Tour says, love the three Beatles. But he doesn't. There's some squiggles and it says love the Beatles because the Beatles were into love and stuff like that. And there's other clues that they've put out on their Magical Mystery Tour. In Glass Onion, John Lennon sings, "Here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul." And obviously fans latched onto this immediately, connecting it to the walrus in I Am the Walrus, because as we know, walrus is the Greek word for death, which it isn't. Anywho, Lennon later admitted that the lyric was just to wind up people, just to confuse people, and it absolutely did. In a 1971 Rolling Stone interview, shortly after the band's breakup, Lennon explained that the line in Glass Onion was a deliberate joke intended to confuse fans. And 9 years later, in 1980, being interviewed by Playboy, he reiterated this point, confirming that he threw the line in just to confuse everybody a bit more. He dismissed it as just a bit of poetry and noted it could have just have easily been the fox terrier is Paul. He just wanted to confuse and wind people up. In promotional photos for the Magical Mystery Tour, three Beatles wear red roses on their lapels. But can you guess what the colour that Paul's is?
Black.
Exactly, which obviously symbolises that he's dead. And, it's a mourning symbol. It's a clue to show that he's separate from the other Beatles and that he's been replaced. And now here's the other one. Okay. On the Magical Mystery Tour cover, the four Beatles wear animal costumes. Three of the suits match in colour and tone, but one doesn't. Paul's. And this anomaly led fans to claim that Paul was being visually separated from the rest of the group. And if you go to somedarecallitconspiracy.com and go into the Paul McCartney pictures section, go to number 10, and this shows the Magical Mysteries Tour cover. And you can clearly see that the bottom character is a walrus, and he's black, and he's very, very different. And, we've heard that the walrus is Paul. So, I mean, what do you make of that, Brent? Do you think that's a clue that Paul is separate from the rest of the group? I mean, the rest of the costumes are white. Does that immediately smack like, Christ, he's obviously dead?
None of it does.
Oh, Brent, come on. But there is a bit of a problem with that. So if you're there looking at the thing and you're on our website, please feel free to sign up to the Patreon or to check out other back episodes. But keep having a look at that. Look very, very closely at the chin of the walrus. Like, notice anything? Anything strike you as unusual, Brent?
Has he got a goatee or something?
Well, sort of. That's John Lennon. Paul isn't the walrus.
Is it?
Yeah. In the animal costumes, John Lennon was the walrus, Paul McCartney is the hippo, George Harrison is the rabbit, and Ringo Starr was the chicken. So John is the one up front. So John is the one in the black costume.
Wow.
Ridiculous, isn't it? So, yeah, none of it it works. And as we've said before, like the clues only make sense if you start from the point of Paul being dead, for which there is absolutely no evidence. Anyway, so the book continues. Having revealed all of that, I'll explain the smooth transition. Paul's early warning that he received from his death nightmares moved him to work it all out. He was sure of his death. He told his family and some of his closest friends that he would die, be replaced, and live on in and through his coming impersonator. Now, having explained all of that to everyone, once he did die, they were all at least half expecting to see me show up as his continuance. They did not at all resist a switch of form because Paul had prepped everyone for it. Some of them were in denial, saying that he was not dead, but had just transformed. Oh, well, like, if everyone's been prepped, that's fine. That'll explain why no one seems at all that bothered. That, you know, if a friend of yours was saying, you know what, Brent, I keep having these dreams about me dying, and then started talking about, it's all right though, like, we'll find a replacement for me. Like, I'm sure there's somewhere out there. Like, what would you do? You know, there'd probably be at least some reaction, wouldn't there, basically? But again, you know, apparently he prepped him. So the book continues. Some skeptics have questioned why all those close to him would go along with such a charade. People close to him did receive some compensation, but that was not their primary motivation for silence. I represented Paul to them. I became Paul to them. The only way to not lose Paul was to accept me, recognizing the Paul in me. They welcomed me with overwhelming gratitude. That's not how anything works, right? That's not like, in fact, in many ways, I suspect that would make it worse. If suddenly a relative of yours or a friend, a good friend or a loved one or whatever died, okay, and somebody went, it's all right, this will cheer you up. I've got a stranger who looks a little bit like Paul Sorvino from Goodfellas, and I'm going to dress him up as Paul. You don't feel sad anymore, do you? Is that there? It's all better. Go on, do the Paul McCartney accent. I won't do it. But it's bullshit. It's fucking bullshit. Okay, it goes on. Listen to this. Jane especially felt his presence in me. Any paid compensations they received officially to buy their silence were more like going away presents from Paul. However, since he was not really gone, it was all more of an acknowledgement of his love for them. Conspiratory silence was not for the money and was hardly ever enforced by violent threats, as some have suggested. They were silent out of love for Paul. They did not want to lose him again. And now that I was Paul, exposing me as anything else would betray Paul and risk losing that man altogether. That's not how anything works, right? Okay, and also, have you seen the blatant contradiction there? Why are you putting fucking clues in the album cover then? Like, are you saying none of it hangs together. Right? Can I just say at this point, okay? Because like the friend of the show, Chris, also had this conversation. She's like, "You do know this is bollocks. Of course, Paul McCartney's not been replaced. Like, why are you taking this so seriously?" It's like, I do understand that, okay, but we've got to approach this from the perspective as if it might actually have some semblance of sense behind it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seen as taking it seriously. So, you know, if we do manage to prove that potentially Paul McCartney was not killed and replaced, it will be rather a hollow victory. Anyway, never mind. The book goes on. It says, I was one of the Beatles in the sense that I was their creative force, the one who, as their new leader, made writing assignments and album concepts. I was always the band's prominent focus ever since Paul died. And if you were being a total bitch, you could say, all right, well, how come that your solo stuff was so very mediocre in comparison to the Beatles? I mean, obviously, you know, the frog chorus reinvented the very concept of music, and Mull of Kintyre is used by Forrest. So I'll grudgingly accept that. But most of it was shite, really, like, you know, middle of the road shite. Anyway, Without going into details that are available all over, the Sgt. Pepper's cover is loaded with symbols illustrating the fatal car crash represented by the car rolling off of Shirley Temple that had caused the head injury, as shown by the split-headed doll. The news blackout was turned off television, carefully hinting at the lies we told to conceal Paul's death. We have his rugby trophy, looking like a higher-than-perfect I, placed in the L in Beatles to form the word. Now, everyone, go back onto the website, somedareconspiracy.com, and have a look at the front cover of Sgt. Pepper's. What does it say? It doesn't say Beatles, does it?
It says Beatles.
But if you've got eyes to see, Brent, you can see that it actually says Beat Lies.
No, it doesn't.
All right, fine. Moving on.
I mean, unless you're going to say that little trophy with the sombrero is is it a trophy with a sombrero?
It's Paul McCartney's rugby thing, apparently, and yeah, that's supposed to be that's what it's supposed to be. But also, I mean, if you're not taken by that, have another look at the yellow flowers that are supposed to be a bass guitar, a left-handed bass guitar, apparently, although how you would figure that one out is anyone's guess. Have you seen what else it says? It only bloody says Paul. Kind of.
Where?
Well, it kind of does a little bit. Like, basically, you can kind of make out I mean, it's shit, obviously, but like the bit, right. It's like, if you go to the very bottom right of the guitar, you see there's a gap in between the two flowers. There's three flowers on the bottom. Yeah, okay. The two to the left of the gap are the base of the L. The one next to it is a U, and then the clumps are supposedly an A and a P. The headstock is the P. It is very much. You did. I mean, you kind of have to squint, like, to be honest. But that is another Paul is dead thing. I
can see where his mind is saying that it's a left-handed instrument. Okay. Oh, because the headstock goes up to the top. No, well, just because of the way it's laying. If you put it on Paul McCartney, that is exactly how a left-handed bass would look. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's also how a right-handed bass would look if you put it down on the floor. If you turned it the other way. Yeah, but if you just took it as it is right now and put it up to Paul McCartney, then that is how he would look when he's playing bass. No, that's fair. Okay, fair enough. So anyway, he says, yeah. So exactly below lies, we have the word Paul spelt out in the yellow hyacinth flowers, since Paul lies dead, and we lie to cover it up. As is common in my songs and in this book, it is a play on words. It's not really a play on words, but like, fine, whatever. Like, so he also says Paul's name is the flowers, shaped into a 4-string bass guitar, but one of our 4 strings is missing. And yeah, again, it's just fanciful shit. Like, it doesn't say Paul, as you quite rightly pointed out. You can sort of squint and make it look at it, but hey ho. Billy also says that the lyrics on the back are significant. The inclusion of lyrics fueled the Paul is dead conspiracy theories. Fans noted that McCartney's back was turned to the camera on the lyric-heavy back cover, and specific lines like "without you" were positioned near his head as supposed clues. He says that Paul is close to fixing a hole, the hole where his head used to be. I mean, I don't know how they could make it any more clear, to be quite honest. Anyway, chapter 15 is called John and Hitler, and it deals with how we selected the images for the Sgt. Pepper's album cover and why John wanted to include Hitler, which is true. This chapter is only available in the unabridged Memoirs of Billy Shears, and we're only reading Billy's back. So, hey-ho. So, in our Sgt. Pepper's title song, I sing, "Let me introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band." That introduction is to tell you that Billy Shears is Sgt. Pepper and that the Beatles is now his band.
No, it isn't. Like, that's wrong. Like, on the Sgt. Pepper album, the band adopted personas for this fictional military band, right? So Paul was Sgt. Pepper, okay? But Billy Shears was Ringo, which is why after they say, here's the Billy Shears, Ringo sings Get By With a Little Help From My Friends. They're introducing Ringo's character. So Billy Shears isn't Sgt. Pepper. So it doesn't work. Mr. Kite was John and Mr. H was George, in case anyone. So it is Paul McCartney that says, so let me introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears. But it's Ringo. Ringo then says it because that's his alias. But, you know, anyway. I mean, it's all very obvious. This is the book. It's all very obvious that Billy Shepherd or Billy Pepper is William, but it's not. But how can you now be sure that either of those names are mine? I thought Sgt. Pepper would be recognized by those who had my Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots albums. At least they should have figured it out. Wouldn't you think that would have at least raised some suspicions? No, not really. Like, also, again, I thought this was all supposed to be a fucking secret to honor, like, Paul's memory and so as to not, like, hurt his family, you know, because then they'd have to lose him again, wouldn't they? But hey-ho, back to the book. The slip ended up in John's documentary Imagine, released in 1988. John and George were being rather rude, talking about me, saying that that and other such things. When John refers to the Fab Four, George quickly corrects him, the Fab Three. John agrees. While it's fine to miss Paul, no one was more fab than I was. Rightio. Anyway, so this is another, like, Paul is dead clue that, like, in this documentary, George Harrison does say the Fab Three. And people say, you see, fucking proves it. Paul McCartney's dead. Basically, what happened was he says the Fab Three, and then they have a bit of a joke. And then Lennon basically, like, says, I'm sorry, I'm just joking, or words to that effect. And it basically was, at the time, Paul McCartney was on the odds with the group. They were all sort of falling out over various things. And so it was that. It was mates having a joke. It's certainly not an indication, or certainly not, it's not solid proof, shall we say, that Paul McCartney is dead. Anyway, the book continues. Do any of you tell yourselves that I am the same Paul who had inches less height, far less musical talent, much less administrative ability, and less focus for the band? Or do you know William? And do you know William's a lyric? So, this is another Paul is dead theory, the imposter theory, that essentially Paul suddenly grew 2 inches in height. And they point to the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album cover, where Paul McCartney appears slightly taller than John Lennon or George Harrison, as proof that he was definitely replaced. Now, that seems fairly cut and dry. Like, there's absolutely no way that you could make somebody look slightly taller or shorter than they were. Oh, hang on. Of course there is. Like, there's shoes. You could use shoes. And the Beatles, you remember the boots that the Beatles used to wear, Beatle boots, had Cuban heels in them, like, to make them look taller. Like, also, there's this thing, and I hate to go all Father Ted, right? But there's the thing about being big or small, or being near or far away. And so basically in every single, there's loads of photos that people have pointed out. Hang on, Paul McCartney should be slightly smaller here. Hang on, John Lennon should be slightly taller here. This all indicates that that's not the same person. Every single one of them, the explanation is either that, well, do you know what shoes they're wearing? Or he's positioned slightly at an angle, or the shot is taken from an angle. It's very, very silly. But as you asked earlier, Billy explains that he chose the name Billy Shears, even though that's not him. But let's not get bogged down with that, because he was a shepherd. But because he was the shepherd, he would also remove the wool from people's eyes. And again, and I don't wish to keep hammering this, but I thought the point was to keep it secret so as to honor the memory of Paul McCartney. Anyway, here, all the Bible fans who buy our albums, I would think that they would catch the ram symbol. Here it is. Abraham's chosen son was replaced by a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. That story is explained in Genesis 22. Abraham took the ram by the horns and offered him in his son's place. My Ram album cover shows a ram caught by his horns. That ram is me, offered up in Paul's place, being entreated to suffer for Paul. However, I am also the one holding the horns. So you can see me as the shepherd holding the ram. And you know what the word ram actually stands for? Replacing a McCartney. Also, Billy, a Billy goat. I mean, how many more clues do you need? Like, anyway, they go on to say, in the album cover jacket, my Sergeant Pepper uniform has a arm patch that reads OPD, an abbreviation for officially pronounced dead, or omitted P and D. Omitting P and D from my name as Shepherd leaves sheer. And in the States, the equivalent of OPD is DOA, dead on arrival. Again, that all came from Fred LeBour, as we've discussed, basically. What happened, right? The reason that this got to be a theory was that Paul was asked in an interview, what did it stand for? And he said Ontario Police Department, which is OPD. And then people found out that that doesn't exist, which led them to believe that he must have had this patch made, like bespokely made, in order for it to say OPD. But the problem with it is that he doesn't say OPD, it says OPP, which stands for Ontario Provincial Police. So, unfortunately, that's another one that has somewhat bitten the dust. Chapter 17. So, this chapter talks about the last shows that the real Paul did in August of 1966. Bloody hell, we're on chapter 17 and Paul's not fucking dead yet. Like, Christ. Anyway. And he also appeared on the David Frost radio show. So this is from the book. The Beatles' last performance was in Candlestick Park in San Francisco. An elated audience of 25,000 heard them give that last concert on Monday, the 29th of August, 1966. As was already arranged, and not because of Paul's death, as has been speculated, John and Neil took off for West Germany on the 5th of September to play parts in How I Won the War, directed by Richard Lester and written by Charles Wood, the same guy who wrote the screenplay for Help. Ernest Paul is Dead recitalist will tell you that Paul and John had argued on the night that Paul slammed the door and ran off in a heated rage. And this is like the original idea that this is what happened in November. Which we know can't have happened because we know where Paul McCartney was shortly after that date. So, first of all, John was with Neil in West Germany. Secondly, although Paul did not rush out and slam the door, he was not in a rage. Actually, as we know, Paul actually met them in Paris on the 16th of September, but we'll come back to that. Brian, in effect, ordered Paul to have 5 songs written and ready to record by John's return from filming, and that put Paul under great pressure. Paul rarely wrote anything without John's support. Brian said that he would tell John to have 5 songs ready too. He also gave John a writing assignment for 2 songs. With the argument that ensued that evening of the 11th of September, Paul did leave in a huff, but he was not in a rage. He did slam the door, but had vented against Brian, not against bandmates. So this is where Paul is about to die. And Paul is Dead enthusiasts think that through lyrics, there's an indication that he slammed the door and left at 5 a.m. after having argued with John Lennon and in a rage crashed his car, like because he wasn't paying attention. Possibly because lovely Rita, the meter maid from Sergeant Pepper's, was a girl that he picked up and was also in the car with him. That's the theory, or at least one of the theories. After Paul left the studio, he did pick up a girl, but her name was not Rita, as is almost universally believed. So, lovely Rita context puts it all together. It's about a cutie who calls for a cab, but that is only figurative. She was a hitchhiker who, in this book, is Donna. She was carrying a suitcase in the rain. Paul, our taxi driver, pulls over, but her looks end up costing her life. And there's some lyrics. Don't you know baby curves can kill? Refers to her nice curves, not to the roads. The idea is that Paul could not keep his eyes off her. That is the idea that John sings in A Day in a Life. He didn't notice that the lights had changed. Paul's distraction was their destruction. So all we really know for certain is what the evidence from the accident scene provided. Paul ran a red light and was hit broadside by a yellow truck that knocked them across the wet road into a pole, resulting in his decapitation and a car fire. It was on Sunday, 11th of September, 1966, just minutes before midnight. So, finally, Paul is dead. Hurrah! Oh, no, that sounds bad. Anyway, so apparently Paul died in his Aston Martin on September the 11th, 1966. And he basically, the registration was LO0840D, and he got it in March 1966. It was finished in Goodwood green with black leather upholstery and chrome wheels. And this car is famous, okay, because it had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, or possibly like an early cassette type recorder installed in the dashboard. And apparently, he when he came up with ideas, lyrics, melodies, or anything like that, he could just record it as he was driving, and he had a record of it. Basically, there's a problem with this. The car actually is owned by Aston Martin themselves. It's part of their heritage collection. It sort of went into a bit of disrepair and was given a full restoration, which was then tied into the Paul is dead conspiracy theories. But if he'd have died in such an accident, he was decapitated and then burnt to a cinder, they couldn't have this car, which they do. Another indication that potentially this is all made up. The book continues. Under the circumstances of Paul predicting his own death and attempting to find some talented lookalike to replace him, Brian had discussed possible Paul imitators with his brother and a few intimate friends. One of them, familiar with my Billy Pepper albums, which had covered Beatles songs, recommended me for the position. Having worked with me before, Brian already knew me, but did not know if I was up for the role. Besides, I did not fully look the part. That's going to be important in a second. Now, if you remember all those other times where shortly afterwards, after the supposed death, he was seen, in France and places like that. But there's something even more damning. So remember that I did not fully look the part. Finally, before Brian had told me a single word about Paul's death, he asked, "How would you like to be Paul McCartney?" I thought he was asking me to fill in for Paul to help with a particular recording session. And I said, I'd be delighted to play on a Beatles album. I would help with a song or two. So I thought, even if it means you're not credited? Brian asks, as if that mattered. Certainly, I said. That's standard for most of us session musicians. I can play as anyone. I do it all the time. Brian slowly nodded his head as he studied my eyes. He smiled. Marvelous, he said. He then told me the whole story. Everything became hurried. My hair was dyed, pictures were taken, and Brian described many of Paul's mannerisms as we drove to Paul's parents' home. All there welcomed me into their family and took me to Paul's house. So this is less than 24 hours after Paul McCartney's been decapitated in a car crash. They've managed to find William, dye his hair, and then take him round to Paul's parents' house to say, it's all right, we've got a replacement, Paul. Now, what's your thoughts on that one, friend?
Mate.
It's so stupid, isn't it? It's fucking ridiculous. Right, okay. Anyway, so
it's like a very, very badly told story.
Yeah. Well, again, like it's clever in a way, because what it's doing is it's taking the Paul is dead theory and it's retrofitting it to certain things from Beatles biographies, and then trying to create a narrative around other things to sort of weave and broaden the theory. But come on. So anyway, the book continues. All there welcomed me into the family and took me into Paul's house. I was given his birth certificate and other documents. Before long, using a picture of me taken earlier that day, Brian made an identification card. He had me write this line. In Mark Twain's words, the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. We met his friend. I signed my note dated the 12th of September. Brian dropped me off at the studio and then rushed off with his new proof that Paul was alive. Now, I'd invite everybody to go back to somedayIcallitconspiracy.com and look at picture number 3 in the Paul McCartney folders. Do you think that if they dyed that man's hair, that he could pass as Paul McCartney?
Not at all.
No, not even fucking close. Like, you know, no, he could potentially pass as a darts player, but no, not a fucking Paul McCartney lookalike at all. Anyway, right, apparently this reporter named Samuel had figured out that this was a lie. He'd clocked that, hang on, that's not fucking Paul McCartney. It's the chap from Goodfellas, isn't it? The book continues. Everyone appeared satisfied by my notarized note, except for Samuel, a reporter whose snooping resulted in the same finding that the police had been forbidden to reveal. The fatal accident vehicle was the property of Paul McCartney. He and a female passenger was dead. Could I just say as well, the internal theory doesn't work. If the police have been told to keep this quiet, why would you be at the least bit worried about being taken through the courts about this fraud? Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? Okay. But all these holes in the internal logic, when people like Mark and Mike have said that this book convinced them that the theory was real, come on, the fuck. Anyway, Samuel was referred to Brian Epstein after the police could not dissuade him. Brian was at the time packing his luggage for a trip. He was interrupted by the call. He immediately met with Samuel in person and said that Paul was on holiday driving to Paris in the same car that Samuel was. Then the same car that Samuel was claiming was destroyed. Well, that's impossible, Sam said. I've seen the vehicle. It's demolished. When nothing else worked, Brian gave an ultimatum. Samuel could either take a cruise and a large payment to drop the story or spend years in court in an expensive libel suit. Brian said, even if you are right, you will lose. We have a lot more resources than you. When that threat failed, Brian called a persuasive Tavistock agent who gave encouragement to Sam over the phone. Sam agreed. Brian drafted a deal edited by Rex Makin, who negotiated further with Sam before it was signed. Then Sam's payment and travel arrangements had to be made. And again, if you've got like Tavistock people, basically, like, of course they haven't, because it's not a real thing. But if you've got these like shadowy figures supposedly connected to institutes of British intelligence and the Illuminati, phoning up and threatening a reporter that they'll kill him if he doesn't like keep this stum, why are you putting out fucking clues? Why are you concerned about being caught? None of it makes any sense. It's all very, very stupid. As I say, Tavistock is a reference to the theory in the Committee of 300 by John Coleman, which is that the Beatles were a product of British intelligence. There's absolutely no evidence at all to back this claim up. And the reporter story, this idea of this Samuel, it's all bollocks. It's totally made up. No incident happened. It's so that later in the book, they can say this lyric refers to Samuel, who was trying to cover up the fact that Paul is dead. It's all retrofitting.
Hey, thanks for listening to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy with Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. Join us next week for the next installment of our Paul is Dead deep dive series. If you'd like to skip ahead and hear all 14 episodes of the series right now, please consider joining us at www.patreon.com/somedarecallitconspiracy, where you can also listen to over 20 unreleased episodes of our now Patreon exclusive series, The World According to Some, aka Twats. Until next time.